Hi, this is my first Korean. As you may know, Korean has two types of numbers, native Korean numbers and Sino-Korean numbers using Chinese characters. Each type of numbers has different uses, but it is very difficult to memorize every single case that the two number systems are used for. So in this video, let me tell you the way that you can more easily understand and remember which one you should use. The native Korean numbers are 하나, 둘, 셋, 넷, 다섯, 여섯, 일곱, 여덟, 아홉, 열. And the Sino-Korean numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What do you fear? All Sino numbers have just one letter for each, but some native numbers have two letters. So in this regard, you may fear that the Sino numbers are simple and native numbers are more difficult for you to remember. But for Korean people like me, both numbers from 1 to 10 are okay, not difficult. But the problem is from over 10. For the numbers multiple of 10, like 10, 20, 30, 40, etc., in Sino numbers, these numbers can be made by simple combinations of previous numbers from 1 to 10. For example, 20 is to say 2 and 10. 20. E is 2 and 10 is 10. The other numbers are the same. So the 30 is to say 3, 3, and 10, 10. And 40 is 40, 4 and 10, something like that. Very simple and easy to make. But in native numbers, these numbers are not made by combinations of previous numbers, but it has dedicated titles for them. For example, 20 is 스물. 스물 is a dedicated name for 20. So in that way, 30 is 서른, 40 is 마흔, etc. This part makes the native numbers more difficult to use, even for Korean people like me as well. This is what Korean people feels about the native numbers. It is very important to understand this difference between them, because from this difference, their different uses and applications have made. You may know that the native numbers are being used for counting numbers. That may be what you were taught from Korean books or teachers. But Sino numbers are also used for counting numbers. Then, how they are different? When do Korean people use the native numbers and Sino numbers? Let me tell you how Korean people differentiate them in their real conversation. Here are 5 apples. Then, which number system would you use? Native or Sino? I would definitely use the native numbers, 5개, because 5 is small. We use the native numbers for small number counting. So, in this case, saying the Sino numbers 5개 is very unnatural, so nobody would say that, even in formal situations as well. Then, what about this? 87 apples. It feels a lot. Then, which numbers would you use? In this case, I would prefer to say the Sino numbers, 87개, rather than native numbers, 87개, because 87 is a big number. Korean people use these Sino numbers for big number counting. And saying the Sino numbers for big numbers happens to younger people more. Maybe elderly people can use or prefer the native numbers even for big number counting, but younger generations prefer to use the Sino numbers for big number counting. Then, you may be curious about what's the definition of small numbers and big numbers? From which numbers is it a big number? Unfortunately, there's no clear boundary between them. So, let me give you just my personal opinion. In my opinion, the boundary is around here, from 40 to 50. So if I count numbers from 1 to 100, then I would definitely start with the native numbers first, like 하나, 둘, 셋, 넷. And at some point around 40 to 50, I may switch to the Sino numbers. This is how younger Korean people count numbers. And as they are younger, this boundary can move this way. And as they are older, this boundary can go this way. And regardless of age, it can be depending on each person. So remember that this is not a rule, but a tendency, okay? For this nature of it, the native numbers are used for saying the age of people, the period of time, something like that. Here is a 14-year-old boy. Then we say the native numbers, 14살. 살 is the unit of age, functioning like blah blah years old in English. And it is also a native Korean word. We can also say the Sino numbers like 14세. 세 is another unit for age composed of Sino-Korean word. And you may be taught that these Sino numbers for age are normally used in formal situations, and the native numbers for age are normally used in informal casual situations. It is true, but not always true. The Sino numbers are very commonly used for older age in informal casual conversations as well. For example, here is a 96-year-old man. Which number do I use? Yes, I would definitely use the Sino numbers, 96, because it is such a big number. I can say the native numbers, 96, I can manage it, but I don't prefer it because it is not so familiar with me. So the Sino numbers are used a lot for these big ages in informal casual conversations as well. Let me show you some examples.
우리가 40이나 50이나
She said 40이나 50이나. 40 is 40 in native numbers and 50 is 50 in Sino numbers. You see that she used two different number systems in a row because there was her personal boundary in between for the native and Sino numbers.
60이 돼도 몰라요. 이게 내가 처음 살아보는 거잖아. 나 67살이 처음이야.
She said 60 and 67 with the Sino numbers. Even though she can be included in an old generation group, she used the Sino numbers for big numbers. This shows how Korean people feel more comfortable with the Sino numbers for big numbers. If you know about Korean numbers, you may already know that for time, we say the native numbers for hours, and for minute and second, we use the Sino numbers. Now you may understand why we have such a weird mixed system for time, because the hour is up to maximum 12, which is small, while the minute and seconds are up to maximum 60, which is big. In my opinion, the hours also should be the Sino numbers originally, but as the hours were small numbers, Korean people might start to use the native numbers for such small numbers because it is more comfortable for us. So if the time is 9, 45, and 23 seconds, for example, we say 9시 as native numbers and 45분 23초 as Sino numbers. If we summarize what we've learned, the native numbers are used for small number counting, and as a part of the small number counting, we use the native numbers for younger ages and hour for time. And Sino numbers are used for big number counting, and as a part of it, we use the Sino numbers for the older age and minute and seconds for time. So, is that all? No. The Sino numbers have a lot more uses and applications because it is simpler and easier to use than the native numbers. The Sino numbers are used for titles or names using numbers. For example, room numbers, bus numbers, address, telephone numbers, date, month, and years, something like that. Here, this date, month, and year include to say a specific date, month, or year. And also it includes to say some period of time in date, month, or year. For example, 3 months is 3개월 in the Sino numbers. And in this case as well, this 개월 is the unit of month as a Sino-Korean word. But this period of time can also be said by the native numbers if the period is short, like 3달. And of course, this 달 is also a native Korean word. And also the Sino numbers are used for some numerical values, such as measurements like weight and height, price, mathematics, etc. This is the summary. You see that the use of the native numbers takes a small part for small number counting and younger ages and hour for time, something like that. And the other uses like big number counting, titles and names using numbers, and some numerical values, the Sino numbers take majority. So if you just remember this small portion of the native numbers, then except these portions, the other portions are with the Sino numbers, okay? I hope it helps you understand the two number systems better. 다음에 봐요. 안녕.